This is part 2 of New Spin Golf's Introductory Equipment Buying Guide, where I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the things that you need to know when you're buying a driver so that you can hit bombs this season. Alright, let's get into it. So the first thing that you really want to look at when you're buying a driver is the size and the shape of the head. So most of the drivers that are on the market these days are what I would consider large driver heads. Obviously, manufacturers are trying to sell you distance, but something that most players need is a lot of forgiveness as well. So that's why most companies' stock option is going to be a club that has a center of gravity location that's at the back of the club. So that just makes the club more stable. So if you happen to hit the ball off the toe or off the heel, the club's not going to twist as much at impact. The other things that bringing the center of gravity back does for you is it makes the ball go higher and it increases the spin rate. So it just helps the ball stay in the air for a longer period of time. That's great for most players, but there are some players out there that would benefit from a smaller driver head. The benefit of that is that the center of gravity is at the front or closer to the face. While it makes the club less stable, it makes it more playable, so you can shape shots easier. Having the center of gravity at the front of the club also lowers ball flight and decreases spin. And those are things that players with higher swing speeds are typically looking for. Another thing that I've noticed when I was fitting drivers is that most players have really high spin rates, and that robs you of distance. So there are some players where I would not go this route just because they don't have the swing speed to handle it and be able to get the ball up in the air with it. But even if you have an average swing speed, but you just have a really high spin rate, going to a smaller driver head with a forward center of gravity isn't necessarily a bad move. Anything to get your spin rate down to an acceptable range is something that's worth considering. And a lot of drivers out there have adjustable weights where you can add weight to the front, add weight to the back, or move it laterally to the side. And I'll show you why you would want to move it laterally when I'm talking about a draw biased driver head. So the reality is that most people hit slices, and that percentage is probably in the high 90s, right? It's the shot shape that you see most often on the course. Manufacturers are combating slices by moving center of gravity closer to the heel. That's effective for two reasons. The first is that the heavier part of the club moves slower than the lighter part. So if you add weight into the heel's going to move slower than the toe, and the face is going to shut throughout the swing, which is great. The other reason that moving the center of gravity to the heel works is because of gear effect. And I'll do a whole other video on gear effect another day, but the big take-home concept for this video is that the ball always rolls towards the center of gravity. So when you move the center of gravity to the heel, you're increasing the amount of surface area on the club face that's going to result in draw spin. Another thing that draw bias driver heads tend to have is higher loft, anywhere from 10 to 11, 12, 13 degrees. So what that does is sets the face a little bit more closed at address, and it allows the player to see a little bit more of the face at address. Just makes it more visually pleasing and a little less intimidating. Also, players with the slices tend to have slower swing speeds and slower ball speeds, so the higher loft helps them get the ball up into the air a little bit more easily. The other thing that draw bias drivers all tend to have is lightweight, whippy shafts, which is a great segue into a conversation about shafts. The shaft is a really important thing to get right because it plays a big role in your overall dispersion and your trajectory. So if the shaft is too whippy, you're likely to hit a hook and the ball is likely to go high. Whereas if you hit the ball if the shaft is too stiff, then your miss is likely to be a slice and you're going to have trouble getting the ball up in the air. So on the right hand side of the screen here, I've got a ball speed and a flex chart. This is just a starting point. It's not gospel and it's certainly not a concrete set of rules. So let's look at an example I've got in the middle here. Player A has a ball speed of 140 miles an hour, but hits a slice. The ball speed says player A should be in a stiff flex, but player A should definitely consider a regular flex shaft to reduce that slice. We know that when a shaft is too whippy, it tends to be a hook, right? So a softer shaft is actually going to work to close the face throughout impact. So that's what you're looking for if you're hitting a slice. You want anything that is going to help you close the face throughout the hitting zone. So going to a softer shaft is a smarter play. So the other consideration with shafts is weight. When the shaft is too light, the miss is likely to be a hook and you're going to hit the ball higher. If the shaft is too heavy, your miss is likely to be a slice and the ball is going to stay really low. A general rule for shaft weight is that it tends to go up as the shafts get stiffer. But that's not always the way it goes. I've seen shafts that are stiff but have only a 50 gram weight. And I've seen regular flex shafts that are 65 grams. So there's a lot of different options out there that are available to the average consumer these days. So it's just a matter of trying some options and seeing what feels and works best. So let's go back to player A for a second here. So player A has 140 mile an hour ball speed with that slice. Player A tried a regular flex shaft to reduce the slice, but felt that it was too soft. So the options there would be to either try a heavier weight in a regular flex or to try a lighter weight in a stiff flex. Both of those options have the potential to help player A slice without sacrificing control. So another thing that you got to look at when you're buying drivers is the loft. It's like most people would come to me and say, I need a regular shaft and 10.5 degrees of loft. That's what their old driver was. That's what they've always played. So that's what they are. 10.5 degree loft. End of story. Okay, but as I was just talking about, there's so many different head styles with different center of gravity locations and so many different shaft options out there now that you might not necessarily be the loft that you think you are. Okay, so most drivers have an adjustable loft sleeve on them now. Yeah, so you can adjust them within a 3 to 4 degree range in most cases. If a driver doesn't have adjustable loft, it was a cost-cutting measure. That driver is cheap, and it's not something you really want to look at anyway. So what all that means is that fitters are going to use loft to fine-tune ball flight data once you arrive at the proper head and shaft combination. So loft influences launch angle and spin, and both of those indirectly influence height. They play a role, but there are other factors involved in peak height as well. So when you get the right shaft and head combination, the club fitter will be able to look at those numbers and adjust the club to see if a lower loft will get you a little less spin rate, or if a higher loft will get your launch angle up a little bit. Just trying to optimize your carry distance. So it's the last consideration for that reason, just because it's so adjustable and it's such a quick adjustment and it's a fine detail adjustment. So it can definitely be left until the end. It's much more important to get the head and the shaft correct in the early stages and to get the loft dialed in at the end. So don't be married to a particular loft. The right loft is the loft that gets you the desired launch and spin characteristics with the best head and shaft combination. Not necessarily just the loft that you played with on your last driver or that you've played with in the past. And the other consideration that a lot of people don't even think about when they're buying a driver is the length of the shaft. So I look at players, some of the best players in the world, like Scotty Scheffler and John Rahm and DJ, even Rory, who's not that big, but the driver doesn't look like it's all that long on him. Some of those bigger guys that I talked about, the driver looks like a child-sized driver when they're hitting it. And that's because they don't play a shaft that's super long for them. They value control and lateral dispersion over hitting the ball 500 yards. And those guys can still bomb it. Okay. Now, I'm a average sized guy across every single metric, okay? So you put me on any fitting chart, I'm stock. So anytime I've tried a 45 and a half inch driver, that I find it too long for me. I find my control goes crazy when I play with a 45 and a half inch driver. So the first year I decided to shorten it, I was really struggling. Like I couldn't keep a ball in play. But as soon as I shortened it, magically the ball was staying in play. The ball that went into the trees was coming to rest in the rough, not quite to the tree line. So that was saving me strokes right there. But I also found that I didn't really lose any distance. In fact, I actually gained a little bit of distance because I was hitting the center of the club face more often. If you follow Lou Stagner on Twitter, he does a lot of great content, but something that he put out is a study that a colleague of his did where he cut a driver down to 3-wood length and did a bunch of comparing between a 45 and a half inch driver and a 3-wood length driver. You only lost 3 yards on average by going down to 3-wood length. And there's a good solid 3 inches of difference there, if not more. Like 3-wood's usually 42 and a quarter, 42 and a half inches long, somewhere in there. So if you'd cut your driver down by a half inch or an inch, you're really not going to lose that much distance, if any at all. So the added gain in dispersion and the saved strokes from fewer penalties off the tee are definitely worth asking a question about getting a shorter driver. Yes, having a longer shaft is going to get you a little more clubhead speed, and that's why the manufacturers sell them as long as they do. But I think dispersion is a really important factor for most amateur players who fail to hit the ball straight very often. So that's not a quick and dirty. We're at 12 minutes here, but that's a detailed look at a lot of the basic considerations that you need to think about when you're buying a driver. As always, I think it's good practice to go to a golf store, get in a simulator, and try out a bunch of different options and look at the numbers and see what actually works best for you. And talk to a club fitter and get their input, get their advice, and get their recommendations. So thanks for watching this, guys. If you like this type of content, please hit the like button and please subscribe to New Spin Golf. And be sure to look for more videos on our YouTube channel and over at newspingolfinstruction.com. Having said that, thanks for watching and good luck with your driver search.